Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay. All right. Good to have you here today, guys. All right. So, as software development teams work on specific projects, right? We tend to set up some standards, right? Some naming conventions and design patterns and libraries and frameworks that we most use for our projects to be successful, right? Because the goal here is to kind of prevent developers from just going on their own and doing specific things that they think should be all right to use, right? But this presents a governance issue when it comes to the organization, right? You may be picking up some libraries that may not be licensed properly, or you may be just doing something that are completely different to whatever the architecture has been, whatever the architecture is that has been in place for you to do your development. So in today's conversation, we are talking about how to set up some level of governance when it comes to the software development lifecycle. How can we not only accelerate the development process, but also how we can assist developers on doing a much better job using the power of AI. So welcome to today's presentation, guys. My name is Oscar Garcia. I'm really happy to see you here today. So let me know if you can see my screen properly. All right, so my name is Oscar. I work on enterprise applications with cloud, web, and AI technologies, as well as data engineering projects. I'm also the author of the Data Engineering Process Fundamentals book. So it's right there. If you scan the QR code right there, it will take you to some of the repos that I have built on GitHub, particularly this one as well, the data engineering repo and machine learning and things like that. So let's keep going. So let's set the stage, right? So I kind of introduced a little bit about what the challenge is. So for today's presentation, the context is that we're going to apply a pattern, right? We're using this VIXA architecture, which basically follows a sort of a view, controller, service, APIs architecture that enables us to kind of handle the separation of concern. So we don't want to build files that have all kinds of code, right? The API calls and UI and service calls and all of that. We want to really kind of separate this properly in an organized way and set up some naming conventions, like maybe PascalCase for UI components, camelCase for logic and services. And those are just patterns that are specific to this conversation, but you in your job, you can have a different approach, right? The point is to have consistency and to kind of drive those patterns and that architecture and allow to your development team to have some kind of governance around that. So the problem with just having, for example, these guidelines on wiki pages, for example, right, with documents that developers need to read, they need to follow, you tend to have what we call architectural drift, which is that you define some patterns for your development process, but no one really is following it, and there's really no guardrails to enforce those patterns, right? So, and this is a typical problem that we see in every development team, right? And in the world of development, we also have some kind of frameworks that can help us kind of catch syntax, but they don't really catch anything else. Like, for example, if you're using the right pattern, if you're using the right libraries, and so on, right? So the solution now is to perhaps, and always has been, right, to set up governance. But in this case, not to just let the developer follow those governance rules, but also use AI, the power of AI, to be able to help us, to assist us and be more productive. So how do we do this, right? So we'll start with what we call the intelligence engine. And what that is really, when we build a GitHub repo particularly, we can use some policies in there. And basically, we can create a centralized configuration file that lives in the repo, right? So it's right in the GitHub repo, and we can set up some global rules. And if you're familiar with this new agentic approach, then we can have in the repos, we can have some kind of contextual rules. So when you're working on a specific file, for example, you want to maybe set up some kind of rules to say, hey, in this file, you can do UI components, or you can use service calls and so on, right? So we're setting guardrails here, and we're setting some kind of policies and what we call system prompts to be able to, for AI to read this and understand this and be able to say, okay, I think I know what you mean, right? I think I know that you're telling me that in this particular files, I can do certain things, but not others, right? And this is basically what we use as an agent tool, right? So the agent tool, if you look at agent frameworks, basically they need to be able to utilize the tool to be able to do a particular work. For example, a database query or API calls or things like that, right? So we're following that type of architecture of an agent structure to be able to help us do development and set up governance. So in this scenario, just take a look at that image, and that's the structure we want to follow. We want to follow this architecture here to be able to say that APIs go in these folders and services, components, and containers. And just that is the pattern we're going to follow, and we're going to define rules for the agent to be able to support this and apply this guideline. Yes, and at the end of this, we send the recordings and the presentation material on an email. And if you join the Google developers group, if you receive those emails, you have the information there. All right. Global governance, right? So how do we establish this at a global governance level? So we start by setting up what we call the Copilot instruction. So in GitHub particularly, we set up that file to be able to write a system prompt. And the system prompt is the overall guidelines and regulations and rules that we're telling the AI to follow. Because the problem with AI, if you use AI on Visual Studio Code or any other IDE, is that AI is going to just try to figure out the context of what you're trying to do based on the files that he sees, based on the project that he has. But it will just try to help you. If you ask AI to help you write a function, it will just try to help you write something, right? But it won't follow any kind of guidelines. It will just go ahead and do whatever it thinks is right for you, which is not often the right thing to do. So by setting up global instructions, we can tell AI, hey, follow these rules, right? We're using this technology stack. We're using TypeScript, Tailwind, hooks. We're using naming conventions with Pascal and camelCase. And this is the flow for our files, right? We create a view, a controller, a service, and an API, right? And basically what that really does is the view is your UI, right? The controller is really the UI actions and hooks and state management. And the service are just integrations to other things, like, for example, specific activities like an API call or things of that nature. An API is just really the layer to call those APIs, right? It's where you go outbound and you make an API call. So that's pretty straightforward. We all do this kind of stuff. But the governance file just looks to what you see in front of you, global governance. That's just a markdown file. And we're just really writing a document, which is going to be used as a system prompt. And you'll see this on the GitHub repo. All right, so we have this global governance, but what makes this engine work, right? What are we doing with this, right? When we set up these guidelines and these rules, if a developer goes and says, hey, I need to create something, I need to create a service, I need to create a new view, like I mentioned before, it will just do whatever he wants. However, with these rules, when you ask, hey, I need to create a service or a controller or a view, then what the Copilot or Gemini, depending on which one you're using, will use is that you will use those rules and it will say, okay, I'm going to follow your pattern and use this approach, right? And it will explain to you what the pattern is, and how it's going to execute it. So for example, if you need to build a new module, as an example, a whole new module, you usually say, hey, let me build a module, and that module is going to have views, it's going to have controllers. So we're going to have instructions, which are also system prompts, that's going to say, when you're building a view, follow this, right? This is going to be a view. We don't allow it to have kind of a state management. It's just UI components, no direct API calls, none of that stuff, right? And we tell the AI Copilot that the control layer rules are that you are a controller and your work is to do a manage of the state, some actions, and use services to be able to interact with external services. Don't use fetch within your file. And this is just a summary of what the instructions are. The instructions are more elaborate and more complete, and we'll see them on GitHub repo once we jump into that. Okay, so how does it reflect as a developer? How does this work, right? So as a developer, you go and you say, okay, I'm working on a view, right? I'm working, and this is more of a React project, and you will see the code there in a few minutes. So we're working on an index TSX file. So TSX is the extension on React for basically HTML views, right? That's how that works. So we're telling AI that anything that's TSX is a view. So if the developer, for example, asks, hey, can you write a fetch call here on this file for me, then the Copilot, the AI is going to say, no, I can't do that, because based on my governance and my rules, this is a view file, and you need to write some of that logic in the controller file and import it into your view. So basically what it's doing is the view should be just a really dumb UI, and every interaction and state management and clicks and all that is handled by the controller. And that's basically what we're trying to tell AI, to follow those guidelines, enforce those guidelines, and when you're assisting a developer, to try to execute the same rules that we have told it. Okay, so how do we do this? So if I'm asking AI, hey, I need to build a new module, a new component, a new service, and so on, right? So you can do many things. So you create the tooling layer, right? And the tooling layer is really like, as I said before, is like the API, the call to the database, a query, or an API call, or so on. So we need to define those tools to enable AI to understand what you're trying to achieve. So we create this, for example, this new module. So if you notice, the file path is GitHub prompts new module MD. That's a markdown file that basically defines a command, and the command is new module, and we'll see that in a minute. So basically that tells the agents to basically create a new module, and that new module will consist of these different layers. And the layers are, you have a container, which is really like the main container that can host multiple components. And the components are your UI views to be able to use controllers for their particular activities and actions, right? And you may have an API layer, you may have a service layer, and so on, right? Depending on what you're trying to do. But what that does, it provides AI the ability to become a scaffolder, where you actually are telling it to, you build all of this, and it builds just the boilerplate, right, with the architecture guidelines for the developer now to pick up those files and just finish the structure of them. And of course, you can build more rules and more prompts to be able to go beyond that, right? If you have like UI rules and things of that nature, validation and things like that, then you can expand on the governance rules to include that as well. So the experience is the following. As you go to on the AI chat and you say, hey, please create this new module, then basically AI reads all these rules that we have written, And it's going to say, okay, I think you want me to build containers and components and services and APIs, and I'm going to follow these rules, right? I'm going to create a Pascal case for containers, camelCase for services, and so on, right? And it's just reading all this and understanding and creating all those files that we have told it to that it needs to create for us. So that's a quick way to be able for a developer to say, hey, I just need to create a new boilerplate. Instead of just creating a random index TS file or some my component.tsx, you're naming the files the way you feel like naming them. AI will set up those guidelines and will just by using the component or the feature name, you'll be able to just build out those files with the naming conventions and with the file structure and folder structure that we're asking it to use. So the result of that is that it generates those layers, right? And the layers are basically a folder-based layer where we have APIs, services, components, containers. And we kind of use the same feature name to be able to name those folders, right? And it creates the naming conventions. It applies the naming conventions. And it builds all those files for you. So you automatically build those files, and with the AI chat, you can say, apply these changes, and it creates the folders, creates the files, and now you're set up, your stage for now just to complete the process, complete the logic that you're trying to build out. And at that point, you can talk to AI as well and say, hey, just build another function here or state management variable here, and so on, right? So, and that gets more granular to the detail of what you're trying to do. So, but remember, so here what we're trying to do, the context of this conversation right now is to set up the guidelines, right? Not to build everything, because of course, custom logic is a whole different topic and whole different conversation. So here we're just setting up the naming conventions and the guidelines and anything that can help us as developers be more productive. Okay, so, but we create files, right? And nothing stops a developer from just basically creating a new folder, creating a new file, and doing whatever we need to do just to get the job done, because I don't want to talk to AI. I don't want to do that, right? But then we're going to go into sort of the review process, right? We're going to do, before we do a pull request, you're going to have to create a review request to be able to ask the team lead or whoever to do a code review and whatever, and be able to say, yes, everything looks okay or not. So we can also use AI to do that for us, right? So as a developer, instead of me sending a review request to the team lead and having it rejected, I can ask AI before I do that. So I can go ahead and say to AI, can you please do a review of my code, of what I'm building right now? So for that, we can build specialized personas, right? And what that is really in the world of agents, right? It's just really of AI, I'm sorry, is an agent that is specifically doing a task, right? That agent can be a code reviewer, a tester, integration tester, or designer, and so on. So you can build these personas, and this is just really a prompt to tell AI, hey, look, you are an agent that your job is to review code and to follow these guidelines, right? So basically, it enforces the architecture. It scans for imports that perhaps are not supposed to be done. It tells you that you shouldn't maybe be calling APIs directly from views, and all those type of guidelines. And all it is really is a system prompt as well, that you basically give to the persona or the agent to say, follow these guidelines and execute all this. And when someone asks you to say, review this code or find violations of my code, then it will pick up and it will run through it, and it will tell you everything that has been done or what's missing, right? Okay, so the interaction, right? So the interaction of the developer experience is that he goes, I'm done with my job. Okay, I'm gonna do a pull request and I'm gonna do a review. So I can say, hey, auditor, please check this component for violations, for example. And basically the AI is gonna go ahead and understand the context of the file you're working on, right? And it's gonna go and run an audit on it, and it's gonna say, hey, I noticed that you're passing all of this, right? You are not, your view looks good, your controller looks correct, your service layer looks correct, but I found a violation. I saw a naming convention violation here that you use index TS instead of controller TS when I executed these patterns, right? So this gives you the red flag right there, right? Before you even submit a review request, and you're like, okay, oh, okay, I see what I did. Let me go ahead and fix that. Okay. So what this does, our approach right now, what we're trying to do here is leverage this concept of autonomy from an agent, right? From agents. So by actually defining the system prompts, right, and these rules and architecture guidelines, we can actually create personas that can help us to observe and kind of execute some guidelines for our code. So for example, the basics, the 101s of an agent is perception, right? Reasoning and action. How does that apply to this approach, right? If you're familiar with any other type of agent architecture, basically perception is the ability to observe what's happening around your environment. So you can compare that to basically the Copilot GitHub agent is basically just looking at your files, looking at your project folders, trying to scan and make decisions based on what is seen, right? So that's the part of reasoning. So you can actually look at the context of your file that you are opening a view, a controller, a service, and based on the rules and the guardrails that we have defined, is able to help us. Is able to say, look, you are calling APIs from a view. That's a violation of separation of concerns, and based on guidelines, you shouldn't be doing that, right? So it's basically what a reviewer team lead will do, right? It will tell you, hey, I'm rejecting this pull request because you're doing this, right? It's the same kind of feedback. So that's great. So we don't have to go talk to our team lead and say, oh, sorry, I forgot, and do the work. You can ask AI, and that's a productivity tool that is just tremendous, right? So the AI takes action on this based on our prompts, system prompts and governance. And it tells you, hey, I can build something for you. I can check the code for you. I can help you build test cases for you, and so on. And so the action that it takes is the execution of the audit, the execution of creating files, creating test cases, and so on. So that's basically the autonomy of an agent when it comes to taking this approach and to help us, to assist developers in the development process, right? All right, so that's enough intro on that. Let's take a look at what we are really talking about here. All right, so first of all, guys, and thank you. And so I put the GitHub repo in the chat so you can take a look at that. And this repo basically has several AI projects. If you can take more time and read about it, read some of the stuff we have here. But for this presentation, we're looking at AI-driven architecture. Let me just blow this up a little bit. Okay. So we're looking at AI-driven architecture, and basically is what we just talked about. We want to set up a scenario where we're setting up a separation of concerns architecture using a particular pattern, and we want our AI agent to help us with that. So for you to be able to navigate all this code, what you want to take a look at this is the following. Okay, and I'll show you this on Visual Studio Code, but for now, we're just going to navigate this project really quick. So the first thing is that you will see in GitHub, in the GitHub folder, a Copilot instruction, right? And that Copilot instruction is just a markdown file with a system prompt. It's a global system prompt that says everything in this repo should follow the following governance rules, right? So in this case, this repo has Python and TypeScript projects, which enable us to showcase some of this stuff that we can actually give a specific governance rules based on the programming language that we're using, right? So So we're telling it that for TypeScript projects, follow this set of rules, right? And we're specifying that. So here's the place where we can actually add global governance rules to the entire project. When it comes to a project like the TypeScript project, right, we go to the architecture project, which is the one we're talking about right now. And you can read some of the background here, right? What we're trying to do with this pattern here, and all this information, right? So you can read all the details of how this works and how do we document the prompts for our agents. But what you want to take a look at this is that on the structure itself, we also have a GitHub project here, which is a folder here, which is really specific for the TypeScript project. So if you see TypeScript, GitHub, so what that does is at the global level, we're saying go to the TypeScript project and load all the rules and guidelines for those languages. So the agent has context, right? Whenever we're working on TypeScript, we're going to follow these rules. If we're working on Python, we're going to follow these rules, right? And usually the naming conventions don't even match based on what you're doing, right? For the TypeScript or Python. But so that's important to be able to tell AI how to behave based on that. But here, this is the important area here, right? You have the Copilot instructions, the prompts, the instructions for every one of those layers, and the agents. And the agents are the code reviewer, the tester, and so on, right? So here I'll jump into Visual Studio Code to show you that, but you can navigate all these files here, and you can actually see the instructions, and you can see how to document. It's really a documentation, right? Instead of having this in a wiki, we're really building it in such a way that we're saying, hey, follow these guidelines, right? And we're just setting this up in a way that we're saying, we're following this architecture for the view controller pattern, use this to build the view, do this, to build the controller, do that, and so on, right? And we're giving it an architecture hierarchy as well. And I know this is kind of a lot of material, and you can, once you get home, you can review that one by one, but just wanted to show you really quick that in the instructions here, we can say for the view layer, I want you to follow these rules, right? Where we're saying, hey, apply to the TSX files, right? So remember, TSX files in React are views, are HTML files. And we're saying, hey, apply these constraints, build this pattern, and so on. So this is the area where you want to build this out, this in a way that it applies to what you're building in your organization, right? It applies to what you're trying to build. This pattern may not fit into your organization, but then you just make it fit into whatever it is that you are trying to apply as rules, right? So you have also the controller layer, and the controller layer now is the one that handles the state management, the actions, the click events, and things of that nature. So here's where you need to give it responsibilities, constraints, rules, and this is really what's building out the prompts for the AI to kind of understand what to enforce, right? So all of this information is loaded in such a way that AI can actually help us with it. So, and just quickly here, so the idea of the agent folder is that you build the personas, right? You build the co-auditor, the reviewer, the tester, and so on. So this is where you actually say, look, I want you to be able to, you are the agent ID Vixa auditor, and I want you to apply all of this, right? Audit these files, audit that, the TS files, the controllers, the services, and so on, and catch anything that doesn't follow this data flow, which is the view, controller, service, and API, right? And not everything is going to fit, right? Like there's going to be some cases where you don't follow patterns like that, but then you adjust that, right? So you may say, hey, but don't enforce this based on this file types because I'm trying to do something different. The point is that this provides guidelines for developers to basically follow in a way that is easy. But let's take a look at this really quick. Let me see if any questions so far. Any questions so far? Just go ahead and write it to the chat. If not, we're just gonna go to. So this is the Visual Studio file, right? This is the project now, the GitHub project loaded on Visual Studio, right? And what you want to do here, this is a React project, and you can run it, right? You can just go to CLI and just run npm start, and it will run the project. It will build it and run it for you, and you are going to be able to play with it. But the point is that that is just a kind of a framework to be able to apply some of these AI rules. And what we're looking at here, when it comes to Visual Studio, we are seeing that GitHub project that we just noticed, right? The agents, the instructions, the prompts, and so on, right? How to build a new component, a new module, a new service, and things like that. So imagine how much more you can build there, right? As you, for example, you can say, build like a next button for your navigation, and you can set up the rule. If someone builds a button and not using that core component, you can set up a rule violation that says you should use the core component for your navigation, not something that you just built. So as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for us to enhance this in such a way, right? But so the idea is, so how this works, right? I mean, I'm on Visual Studio Code. What do I do with it? So what you want to do is you want to open the chat right here. All right. So this is the AI chat, right? This is Copilot for GitHub. You can use Gemini as well, and it works the same way, right? Because at the end of the day, these are markdown files that they can consume as prompt, and you can shape the personas of those agents to execute what you need. All right. So I'm just going to load this chat history that I have here, and I'm just going to show you some of the interactions that we basically talked about. But the idea is that you can, on the chat, you can ask, for example, let me see if we can blow this up a little. In the chat, we can ask, hey, what are the governance rules defined in this repo? Right? We can ask that. And then the agent, you will see that is just spinning off and loading some of the stuff and kind of saying, okay, I'm looking at the documents, I'm seeing the governance rules, and it starts telling you what it sees, right? And it says, hey, I found these Copilot instructions. I know there's some contribution governance in there. There's a TypeScript, a specific governance, right, that I'm loading from this file. And it's basically telling me that I need to follow this architecture guidelines, right? To use this language and this libraries specifically, and to apply hooks only for controller for class components, and class components are forbidden, right? So we're just using functional components with hooks, basically, right? If you're not familiar with React, don't worry about it. Just think about how you build your projects in the language you're using, C#, Angular, Python, whatever. It's just whatever the rules are of how you build your components is what we're trying to define here, right? And apply the naming conventions, view controller pattern, and it just gives you a summary of everything that it has seen on those prompts. So it's ready to enforce everything because it already has context of what you're trying to do, right? And it has context to be able to help you. So we can ask also, hey, how do I create a new TypeScript service, right? And because you are giving it context with a question, right? You're saying TypeScript, it already knows to follow the TypeScript governance rules, and it's going to go and tell you, okay, based on what I see, you're going to use this pattern, right? Folder as a namespace pattern, and build this, right? Create a file location like this, build business logic that look similar to this, and it's just giving you some of those boilerplate code to be able, and structure, folder structure to be able to execute and rapidly build your project. Now, this is where you need to kind of review and say if you've given your team enough help with this, or you need to increase and beef up some of these prompts so the AI can help us even more. So at this point, AI is not making things up. At this point, it's just following your guidelines and executing what we are telling it, as opposed to creating some random project structure that it thinks you need, right? And I'm sure you've seen that when you using AI for your projects, that it just gives you some stuff that's maybe helpful, but it may not be relevant to what you're trying to do. All right, and it tells you what to do and what not to do. So it gives you a total governance summary of everything that you can do. So imagine onboarding a new developer and showing that developer just to have a conversation with the co-pilot, and he will know everything. He or she will know everything about the project, what to do, how to get going, how to do reviews, and so on, right? And you can ask, like, can you create an API call using fetch in this file? And it tells you the governance, right? Hey, you can use this, and you should be importing into from the APIs, and it gives you everything that we have defined, right? So the point is, and now we can have a valid conversation with AI as opposed to some random, hey, build me a service, build me an API, and it doesn't know. It will just build something and create a file somewhere, but now it has enough context to know how to build the folders and where to build the files and how to build those files. And you can ask here, for example, hey, a code auditor, can you check the components, this component for violation? And remember, what it's doing is actually looking at what files you have open, right? It's looking at the context of the files that you have open, right? And it's going to do those validations for you. It's going to start running through it and say, hey, I see that you are following the layer, the controller, and so on, right? So it just gives you all of that, and it pinpoints where the violation is, right? The violation is here, and it thinks that it should be index, not controller, and so on. So basically, this will say, tell me that in the prompt, I have an error that I did index TS as opposed to controller TS, and I corrected that already. But it will pick that up, and you as the architect, for example, the team lead, will kind of review this and see if it's really giving you the right information, update the markdown files to be correct, and be able to make this agent helpful. So here we can actually say, I want to build a new module, right? In the new module, I go and I say, AI, build this new module, feature name, user profile, and AI will just go scan all those files. It knows all the context of what you're trying to do. And it starts building everything, right? Gives you all this information. Hey, I'm building the APIs, I'm building the service, the controllers, the components, and so on, right? The containers. And the container really is the master container, right? That can host multiple components. So and it just starts telling you, right? It starts telling you, hey, I can do this. I can create all these files, right? And it just gives you a list of all this work that is giving you a roadmap of what it can build for you. Okay, so it's very powerful stuff that we can really truly now use, as opposed to using some kind of tool that does some hard-coded files that are most of the time not even useful to us. We can actually design or guide the AI to be very useful to us and to be able to help us in and basically setting up our governance for our projects. And this applies to everything. This applies to any language, C++, C#, Python, and so on, right? SQL projects and so on. So this is this is something you can do and start thinking about how to truly leverage AI, right? Not just to AI, build me a function that does this, but to actually build projects and build frameworks and things of that nature by leveraging this approach. All right, so in summary, guys, by being able to integrate these governance rules as markdown files into our projects and using a AI agent like Gemini, Code Assistants, or GitHub Copilot, we can actually feed those markdown files as system prompts to the agent, so we can give them context on how to help us in the development process, right? As opposed to just some random help and feedback when we're building out a particular set of files. It will just follow those guidelines and help us build something that is aligning with architecture guidelines and rules. So this helps us eliminate drift, because we can actually eliminate architecture drift, because we can actually now set up this personas with code reviews and architecture reviews and so on, to be able to say, hey, are we developing something that we're not basically just completely tossing aside and not following? So it is very important. And always, when someone asks you, or when you start thinking about agent components or building agents, the comparison here really is that you have the concept of a system prompt, right? Which is the global instructions here that gives the entire system context on what you're trying to do. And you also have what we call RAG, right? Which is like vector databases. If you heard about those terms, when you're actually getting additional context on what you're trying to achieve. Well, the additional context that we're giving the agent is the instructions. So when we're saying, hey, build this, when you're working on a view, do this. When you're working on a controller, do this. When you're working on a test case, do this, right? And you have the agent process that information and is able to help us follow those guidelines. And we have the tooling, which is the prompt libraries, to be able to say, create a new component, create a new service, and so on, create a new test case. And of course, the developers and human prompt is us interacting with the AI through the chat window. That's really where everything connects, right? We're saying, hey, help me build this, do this, and it will help us be more productive. So don't forget agent personas, which is really those prompts to be able to say, you need to behave as this and just do this, right? Stay within the focus of doing this. Not, don't go on a on a random text generation of something that is not relevant to what we're trying to do. All right, guys. So any questions? So don't forget, look at the chat, look at the link to the repo. Please start the repo. If you enjoy this presentation, we are also going to send an email with a recording and the slides that you see here. So when you get one of those community emails for the group, please read it so you can get the presentation materials and the recording. And thank you for being here today. Please follow the project in general, the AI project. You can start that project. If you start that project, you get updates on all the updates. Join the YouTube channel. We're gonna move this to YouTube as well, so you can join that channel so you can follow for our next presentations. If you don't have any other questions, okay, I think then thank you everyone for attending. Please follow the GitHub projects and YouTube, and I'll see you in the next conversation. Okay, thanks.